Welcome to the X Factor podcast. I'm your host, Charles Epstein. Today we're joined by Dr. Solange Charas, a triple threat talent. She is CEO and founder of HG Moneyball, a platform that optimizes the impact of human capital from a brand and financial perspective. She's also a professor of practice at Columbia University in the Human Capital Management Master's Program. She serves on the ISO Human Capital Standards Committee and is a distinguished research fellow at the Conference Board. And when she found time in between all of that, and I don't know how she managed to do all that, Dr. Charas co-authored the excellent and surprisingly fun read entitled Humanizing Human Capital, Invest in Your People for Optimal Business Returns. Solange joins us today from our office in New York City. Solange, hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. And given all that you do, I do appreciate, we appreciate your carving out some time for us today.
Always. I always like high conversations with you.
Yes, same. Thank you. And by the way, since we last spoke, you recently, I need to congratulate you on being elevated to full professor at Columbia. By the way, is that the right terminology? Elevated, promoted? I mean, how do you phrase that?
I'm not quite sure. I was a lecturer at Columbia, and they had an open position, and they entertained applicants for that position. So it was a competitive process, and luckily I made the cut. So maybe it's elevated, or maybe I just got lucky and got appointed.
Well, no, we weren't going down that road, Solange. I mean, I just wanted to know what the proper terminology. I mean, your credentials are impeccable. I'm sure there's good reason. That's a very rigorous process, and Columbia is not just a podunk university, so that is quite an honor. So again, sincere congratulations, significant achievement. And speaking of, I mean, how does that change your day to day?
So the role is called a professor of practice, and there is an expectation that I will be practicing. So Columbia sets up my accountabilities to include being in the market, speaking, writing, serving clients. And it's, I think, a brilliant role because not only am I engaged in the scholarly practice as a professor, teaching my students the rigorous approach around academic research and inquiry, but I'm also bringing into the classroom lived experiences that are current. So I can talk to my students about what I'm seeing in the marketplace with my clients and with other high-level practitioners.
So it's really an extension of what you've been doing, it seems, but it just has broadened your platform.
Yep. And it's simplified my life a little bit because I used to be an adjunct at 4 universities.
Oh, God.
So as a full-time professor, I'm no longer allowed to be an adjunct anywhere else. So now I can focus all my teaching attention just on one university.
Yeah,
So,
by the way, as a quick aside, I have actually done in my varied career some adjunct work, and I have some hilarious stories about it. I look back on it with a mixture of fondness and horror.
well, I'd love to hear your stories.
Yes. Well, one day, yes, absolutely. But in any case, again, big congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Humanizing Human Capital, it's the title of your book. And while the name of your company is HG Moneyball, in other words, heavily analytics minded, Humanizing Human Capital is central to what you do, your mission. How would you define humanizing human capital? And is it getting harder or easier with new technology and new modes of work?
So let me take the first part of your question, which is about defining humanizing human capital. Stella Lepouchore, my co-author, and I started thinking about this book about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And we started writing in earnest. Well, the book has now been out for 2 years, so 4 years. And that was
how long has it been out?
the book was published in September of 2022.
Oh, okay.
Believe it or not. So it's been out for almost 2 years. This September, this next month, it'll be 2 years that the book is out.
Have you updated it since its publication?
No, we haven't updated it. I don't think we really need to update it yet because we don't really address issues. I mean, we talk about COVID a little bit, but we wanted it to be less time sensitive and have a longer shelf life. We do address technology and the advent of technology. We do talk about Gen AI and AI in the book because it has been around. It's been around for that long. So we do talk about the disruptive impact of technology, of AI and Gen AI. Maybe we'll think about updating it next year. Mm-hmm. Let's see what happens. But the reason that we actually call it humanizing human capital is exactly because of technology. And what we were seeing in our experience was that human capital practitioners were eschewing technology. They were eschewing an analytics approach because the thought was, oh, if I start applying analytics to human resources, it's dehumanizing. It's treating employees like they're widgets or like they're not humans. And what we wanted to do was dispel that myth that, in fact, when you apply analytics, you better understand the behaviors and the impact of the behaviors of your employees on business outcomes. And you're better able to address in a broader sense, in a more encompassing, in a more holistic sense, the things that your employees need. So I grew up in an era where the squeaky wheel got greased and in an HR world. So if an employee complained about something, we would deal with that employee and with the problem, but we didn't really think about anybody else because they weren't a squeaky wheel. And what Stella and I propose in the book is that if you apply data analytics approaches, you can actually impact positively a broader segment of your population. So instead of waiting for the squeaky wheel, use data analytics to start uncovering behavioral trends in a broader sense so that you can bring more value to employees faster. So we don't want to dehumanize. We want to humanize by using data analytics.
You know, if I can make a point, and I think that's captured in the name of your company, HC Moneyball. It's interesting because I read Michael Lewis's book and then found out sometime later that they're going to make a movie on it. How could you possibly make a movie about analytics? It was a fascinating story, some fascinating characters. How could you? And then they made this movie, and then you realize, and the movie kind of makes you a point that this analytics actually goes beyond cliches, looks a little bit deeper, finds talent where you otherwise wouldn't. So it is very much a humanizing process to the extent that you're going beyond the cliche, going beyond the surface, and discovering people for who they are and what they really offer. And you may otherwise miss that. So it is very human.
It's very human, and it's very beneficial for businesses. So Stella and I did a research project at the Conference Board. She's a senior research fellow at the Conference Board. And a couple of years ago, we did a research project where we surveyed the Human Capital Center members. And we had about 100 companies participate in a survey. And And we asked all sorts of questions. I mean, it wasn't just about human capital analytics, but we did ask organizations if they were, like 3 years ago, if they were committed to analytics, to human capital analytics. And what we found was of the 100 or so participants, about half of them were, about 46% of the companies that were part of the Human Capital Center at the conference board then, had human capital analytics as part of their accountability in the HR function. Some were very committed to it, where they had staffs of at least 6 dedicated full-time human capital analysts. Some were less committed, where they had 1 or less than 1 employee committed to doing human capital analytics. And then the 54% of the organization said that they don't use human capital analytics at all when they make their human capital decisions, when they make their program decisions or their budgeting decisions. And what we found when we compared the companies that do use HR analytics as part of their HR management process compared to those that don't, the ones that did incorporate human capital analytics had HCROI, we'll unpack that in a second, that was almost 3 times higher than companies that did not use data analytics in managing their human capital practices. So what does that mean? So HCROI is a way of understanding the efficiency and effectiveness of your human capital function as a contributor to sustainable profitability for your organization. So HCROI sounds just exactly what it is, human capital return on investment. So what is the return on investment of every dollar we spend on human capital, people and people programs? And HCROI, that return on investment, directly impacts company profitability. As you would imagine, if I get a higher return on investment on every dollar I spend on human capital, then that return supports better profitability performance, right? My dollar is generating more value, or it's going further than other organizations. And if you look at the way HCROI is calculated, it uses revenue and expense in its calculation, which is exactly the same numbers you use to calculate profitability. So they are directly related to one another. So when we saw that finding, it supported our thesis, our hypothesis, that when you use data analytics to inform decision-making around people and people programs, you make better decisions. Listen, I was a CHRO at 3 different organizations. And I know that there were times where I just stuck my finger in the air and I tried to figure out which way the wind was blowing and said, okay, we're going to do that, which is exactly the wrong way to make decisions. You need to do data analytics to understand which programs are working, which programs are supporting employees, which programs you're getting your return on investment on, and invest in those programs, not in programs that you think or feel may be good for the organization. That's like walking into a dark room and trying to figure out, where the furniture is.
Yeah, no, for sure. So in the 2 years since you wrote this book, you and Stella, have you seen the needle move any?
We've seen big shifts in the way that organizations are thinking about managing human capital and in the way organizations are disclosing their information about human capital management. And it's not just because companies are saying, oh, that's a good idea, right? It's because the stakeholders are asking for information about how well companies are managing human capital in the organization. The biggest stakeholder, or I shouldn't say the biggest, but maybe the one that most people focus on, are investors. And when you think about the fact that human capital is typically an organization's largest line item expense, investors want to make sure that when you put money into something that you spend the most money on, right, that you're using that money appropriately. You're using it effectively. So when organizations spend 50, 60, 70, some organizations spend 80% of their total expense on people, there are two things that happen. One is investors want to make sure that when you allocate money to human capital, you're actually getting a return on that investment. And second, it is the single area in the organization that you can leverage to impact better operating results. Making small improvements to your biggest expense generates a bigger impact on bottom line performance than getting a big, improvement in performance in a small expense, right? People always say, I'd rather have a small slice of I'd rather have 10% of a very large pie than 100% of a very small pie, right? So we want to help organizations, and that's really what HC Moneyball is all about, is helping organizations figure out how can they optimize the return on investment in the money that they spend on people. Now, something else really big happened. The SEC, for the last almost 4 years, has said that they are going to require at some point, and we hope that this October is when they come out with their disclosure requirements. But for the last 4 years, they have been basically saying, we're going to ask public organizations to start reporting on human capital performance. Now, right now, today, there is a requirement that organizations disclose on human capital performance if they deem it to be material. So it's principles-based. And what organizations have done is public companies have disclosed information around DE&I and around leadership, performance. But it's essentially voluntary because those organizations have deemed that human capital performance is material to their performance, to their outcomes.
Right now it's voluntary, and which is to say there are also those standards.
There's really no guidelines on what you can disclose. As I said, in October, we're hoping that the SEC is going to disclose their reporting requirements that are not voluntary or principles-based, if it's material, but rules-based, so that regardless of whether or not you think human capital moves the needle on your performance, you're going to have to disclose anyway. And what we're anticipating is that the SEC is going to require disclosure in 4 different areas. The first thing they're going to and right now, the only thing that public companies are required to disclose is headcount. But there are no guidelines on that either. Is it full-time equivalent? Is it full-time, all employees, regardless of full-time, part-time, gig, right? So there are no guidelines there. Some companies will disclose just their full-time W-2 wage earners. Some companies will disclose their full-time and their part-time and their gig workers. So there are no rules around that right now. Going forward, we hope the SEC is going to require companies to disclose not only the number of employees, but the type of employee. Is it full-time, part-time, gig, seasonal, contracted? So that you can actually understand the demographic makeup of your workforce, of the workforce. The second thing is diversity disclosure. So companies that have more than 100 employees have to file with the EEOC, make that information public. Okay. The third is around the stability of your workforce. So what is average tenure and what is your attrition rate?
Okay.
And the fourth is, and this is, I left most significant for last, is an aggregated disclosure of your human capital cost, or the total cost of human capital, TCOC, TCOC. And what happens right now is organizations on their financial statements disaggregate human capital cost. They put their staff cost, they allocate it maybe to cost of goods, maybe to marketing, maybe to R&D. So they take their cost of human capital and they allocate it to different line items. And as a reader of financial statements, you cannot understand how much companies spend on people and people programs. What the SEC is saying, we want you to disclose in a line item on your income statement your cost of human capital. So aggregate it, don't put it in your cost of goods or your marketing. Just give us one line that says, this is my total cost of human capital. And that includes everything, people and people programs. Now, we see that with financial services firms. They do that already. So the big banks and some big insurance companies already have a line item that says salary and wages, so that we can understand how much these companies are paying for salaries and wages. But it doesn't include everything else, like recruitment costs, training and development, succession planning, any HR coded expenses are not necessarily disclosed by companies today, but they will have to be disclosed in the future when and if the SEC comes out with this requirement.
Right. Solange, in the book, you distinguish between people analytics and human capital analytics. What are the chief differences and why are they important?
We think about it in a pretty straightforward way. People analytics are analytics that are focused on the effectiveness of human capital programs. So we can say, we put in a retention program. It cost us X number of dollars. Our attrition went from 16% to 15%. Yay. And that's people analytics. So we're actually looking at whether or not human capital programs have achieved their desired outcomes. Human capital analytics is really connecting human capital performance to financial performance. So that's great that your attrition went down 1%. What does that mean for bottom line performance? And to quote Dave Ulrich, human capital doesn't exist just to do human capital. Human capital exists to support the organization and the customers of the organization. So let's take it one step further and understand not just how well our human capital programs are performing, but the impact that that performance has on sustainable enterprise performance, corporate financial performance. So that's the big difference. One just looks at human capital performance at the program level. Human capital analytics looks at how human capital is supporting or sustaining business outcomes.
Okay. No, that's an important distinction to make. Now, you refer to the disruptions affecting the workplace in terms of the 4 Ds: demographics, digitization, datafication, and disintermediation. We will get to disintermediation in a moment, but describe how each of the first 3 Ds, demographics, digitization, and datafication, easy for me to say, Solange, is disrupting the way we work.
Yeah, and I have to give a shout out to Stella because she came up with the 4 Ds, which I think is brilliant, and we based the book on it. So thank you, Stella. So demographics, and I'm just reading from the book. These shifts include a multi-generational workforce, growth in global, local, social, job mobility, population aging, and greater diversity in backgrounds, thinking, and other traits listed that we talk about in the introduction of the book. So we have to understand as human capital professionals, and I want to broaden it out to say, and business professionals, we need to be aware of the fact that the demographic of our workforce is changing, because how else are we going to address what those employee needs are? And we also have to come to terms with the fact that our labor supply is shrinking. It's definitely shrinking. In fact, the BLS predicts that 25% of our workers, a quarter of our employees today, are going to just go away in the next 5 years. It's the retirement of the baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. You're a baby boomer. We don't really think about retiring, but I'm the tail end of the baby boom, and I consider myself to be a junior senior. I'm in my early 60s. So, and I'm the tail end of it. The top end of the baby boomers, they're in their late 70s and early 80s. How much longer will these people, the majority of the baby boomers that are still in the workplace, are they still going to be in the workplace? So the BLS estimates that within the next 5 years, 25% of the total workforce in the United States is just going to exit the workforce. And the problem is that the combined Gen Zs and Gen Alphas together, as they grow, as they age and become workforce age, is much smaller than the 25%. In fact, they're saying that it's like 12 to 15%. So right now, we have 8.2 million open jobs in the United States and 6.26 million people that identify as being unemployed. So we have 2 million jobs that, even if we could find the right fit, will never be filled with people, because we have more open jobs than we have people. Now, right. Add another, labor force is shrinking. Do we have to stop growing our jobs? Well, we don't want to not have job growth, because that's what fuels the economy. We need to figure out how to do work with fewer people.
Hello, AI.
Hello, AI. Didn't it happen just at the right time? Now, there is going to be some displacement. So, for example, when elevators first got invented, you needed an elevator operator. That was a job. Then elevators got mechanized. We didn't need elevator operators. So the job of elevator operator went away. So AI is going to displace certain jobs. And what Stella and I say is, your job is unlikely to be replaced by AI in the near future. But you, as an employee, if you don't know how to use AI, you may be replaced by somebody who does know how to use AI.
Well, I don't want to necessarily get into this conversation, but I think there are a lot of unintended consequences of AI that are sort of underneath the surface. So while my job may not be immediately threatened, or may not be threatened the next 3 to 5 years by AI, it may change a little bit. Yep. I may augment it by using AI, but might AI put some pressure on wages, on the ability, because all of a sudden people out there in the marketplace are going to be able to use AI, and they're going to be able to put out X amount of work in fewer hours,
right?
And they compete on the basis of that. So it's going to really put downward pressure on wages, particularly people in the gig economy who charge, by the hour. All of a sudden, they're going to be competing with others who are using AI to say, "Hey, look, we can do what used to be done in 3 hours in one." So I think that's another possible consequence and likely consequence that people need to think about as well.
Yeah, and I get it. There's tension in the system. There's tension because companies don't want to pay as much for labor, because if their labor costs go down, then their profits go up. employees want to get paid more. So how do you reconcile that tension? Employees probably need to show how valuable they are, right? And there's certain things that AI and Gen AI can't do. They're not very good at making decisions. They're not very good at using judgment. We still need humans in the loop. But if you, as an employee, can leverage AI and Gen AI to make yourself more productive and more valuable, right? And maybe you do the work of 1.5 people, maybe the company is willing to give you more money because there's an economic benefit to the organization of keeping you, a human in the loop, who can produce more work than either firing you or hiring two to replace you.
Let me ask you something, Solange. I mean, earlier in this conversation, we talked about data analytics, and I asked you over the last 2 years since you published your book with Stella, have you seen the needle move a little bit? And, HR people particularly embracing this approach, because we know it's been very slow. I guess the same thing applies to AI. What are you seeing in your conversations with the same people about AI?
I think that AI is being embraced by certain parts of the organization more than others. I think that human resources is still trying to figure out how to introduce, leverage, manage, govern the use of AI and Gen AI by their employees. I see this in the university. So at Columbia, there's a policy around Gen AI, which allows professors to determine whether or not they're going to allow their students to use Gen AI in producing their assignments.
What would be the argument for allowing them to use?
I'm way for allowing students to use Gen AI. For a couple of reasons. One is they're going to have to learn how to use it in the real world, in their work world. So why not provide a safe space for them to be able to learn how to use it effectively in their schoolwork? Number one. However, the assignments are different because Gen AI is really good at synthesizing data, but maybe not so good at being creative in terms of the way it applies information, it being innovative. So the assignments that are going to be, if we allow Gen AI to be used in creating, assignments, responding to assignments, I'm actually looking for a higher level of cognitive input, of critical thinking in those assignments. Columbia's policy is they allow the instructors to determine whether or not they're going to allow students to use Gen AI. But if there's 2 sections or more of the same class being taught by different instructors, those instructors have to be consistent. So
that makes
you
sense.
can't have one that says yes and one that says no. You either all say yes or you all say no. And there are a couple of instructors at Columbia that do not like Gen AI.
Oh, I can imagine.
And so, over the summer, I taught a course that had a second section, and we both agreed that the students can use AI. But we graded them a little differently, right? And we told them that we want to see more innovation, more new thought, more critical thinking skills. And sometimes the students default to just doing the assignment on their own because it's easier than having to come up with creative ideas and creative applications. And so that's how we're actually going to handle it going forward. At least in my classes, I'm going to tell the students, if you use Gen AI, 1, you need to identify that you're using Gen AI. And 2, you have to raise your work to a different standard.
Right.
And one of the things that I'm probably going to do is ask the students to give me their prompts. What prompt did you give Gen AI when you addressed the assignment question?
Uh-huh.
And so it's actually more work, because not only do they have to do the assignment, but they have to show me how they've done the assignment and what went into their thinking when they asked Gen AI the questions that they asked them to come up with the results.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I'd love to see a couple of Columbia professors debate that particular topic. Sparks would fly.
I think it's a very, very interesting area. And I think that there are people on both sides of the issue. So
Yeah, there are good people on both sides, Solange.
oh, please.
I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry.
Jeremy.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I take that back. I know you never thought I'd get around to it, Solange, but now for the fourth D, disintermediation. Unpack that if you would.
So speaking up or the other D's?
Oh, yes, of course.
So let me just read the 2 sentences from the book.
Okay, sure.
So digitization includes intelligent automation, virtual augmented mixed reality, artificial intelligence, AI, automated devices, sensors, and the Internet of Things, IoT, robotics, and bionic augmentation. So that's digitization. It's also disruptive. We see digitization all the time. We, as users of the internet, see digitization every time we go on a website and a chatbot pops up. We are interacting with a digital worker.
Yeah, somebody blew my mind some weeks back on another podcast, and he said something like the average employee uses, and I forget what the number was, but some crazy number. It was in the hundreds, I believe, of applications you use on a given workday. And you break it down, and it's like, my God, yes. I mean, you talk about digitization. It's
how many applications do you have on your iPhone?
Well, yeah, precisely.
Galaxy,
precisely, right? And applications are sort of integrated into other applications.
And here's the interesting thing: it's also generationally driven. So us baby boomers, we still pick up the phone and call each other, but the millennials and the Gen Zs, this is their community. They feel connected with others when they're on their phones. Oh, by the way, you like the picture of my little dog? So it's natural. They are digital natives. Those 2 generations,
right,
when their moms are wheeling them around in their baby seats and their baby carriages, they've got devices that they're playing with. We are not digital natives. And I bet you could go into any baby boomer's home and see the clock on their microwave flashing 12.
Right.
We are not digital natives. We did not grow up with this type of technology, but that generation did. It is second nature for them. It is native for them to use apps and use technology. So they have no problem with digitization.
Yeah, so datification?
Datification in the harvesting and analysis of data about interactions across and between humans, devices, sensors, bots, and tools. So what we want to do is we want to get massive amounts of data to be able to see patterns, get insights, find optimal solutions, make decisions and recommendations, nudge users and employees, and personalize experiences. We spend a lot of time in the book talking about personalization. And we have a point of view about, industry 1.0 to what Stella and I are now calling industry 6.0, which is the meshing or the fusion between humans and technology, right? Which is what we're seeing. And it's not going to be far off until we actually see augmented humans in the workforce. So there's all sorts of research now that are helping disabled people being able to move cursors with their eyes. Their technology is augmenting humans. And I don't think it's going to be far off until we actually see humans voluntarily being augmented to be smarter, faster, better. And
Yeah.
I will be first in line for that. If they come up with a chip that they can put in my head for me to be able to be smarter, faster, better, I'm there.
Okay, so without further ado, disintermediation.
So this, just from the book, and this is on page 8 of the book, so you get it right away. This is the process of removing the middle person, the intermediary, from the value chain. It includes the rise of the gig economy, collaborative consumption, networked work, 3D printing, blockchain, cross-value chain companies, and more. So we're seeing blockchain disintermediate the title industry because blockchain ensures provenance. So we don't need a title company to go and search who owns a piece of property. Blockchain shows you the whole provenance, the whole transfer of the property. And what makes blockchain secure is that it is distributed. It's not one computer that has the data. It's all computers, a whole network. So you can't arbitrarily change something. So that's what they were saying, is that blockchain is going to remove the need for title companies to go and search for title because it's right there. The internet disintermediated libraries. We don't need to go to a library anymore to look up a book or, go to the card catalog, search through, right? So the internet now has, I'll give you another perfect example of disintermediation. When I started my career, I was an executive comp consultant. And to do executive comp work, you need to read the proxies of competitor organizations to your client. And I would have to fill out a form and order the proxies from a proxy company. And they would send me, depending on the number of proxies I ordered, a box of proxies that were printed on onion skin paper. You remember onion skin paper?
I do.
So if I worked with a client, the work would stop for 4 or 5 days until I could put my order in to the proxy company. They would pull the proxies, compile them, send them to me. Now I can go on the Edgar site, the SEC Edgar site, and I can access any proxy in a second. I don't need to wait. I don't need to go to a proxy server company. The internet disintermediated that industry of having a warehouse of proxies or ordering the proxy from the company to send to the proxy company to send to me. So that's an example of disintermediation, is that technology has removed the need for certain jobs, like automated elevators, disintermediated. So this concept of disintermediation, how is it going to impact people? And I think that we gave a bunch of examples, especially how it's going to impact the work of the future. And in fact, Stella and I just wrote our August blog on how AI is going to impact work and the nature of work. So if you want to see how we're thinking about it, I invite you to go to our book website, which is www.humanizing human capital, and click on the blog tab, and all of our blogs are there. And we also have a newsletter. So when you get onto the site, it'll prompt you to sign up for the newsletter.
Excellent.
That we send out every month. The newsletter is sort of a digest of interesting things that have happened during the month, plus a link to access the blog post. So we do a blog and a newsletter every month.
Last question I want to ask you. You speak a lot about, we touched a little bit here in our conversation about the importance of aligning corporate governance, finance, and human resources. And that's really intrinsic to sustainable organizational success. And you speak of something called strategic workforce planning, SWP. What does SWP involve? What areas of the organization does it touch? And you also talk about it, and you also talked about this a little bit at the outset of this conversation. And in what ways is it aligned with the treasury function
Yep.
in the organization?
So I came up with sort of this analogy between strategic workforce planning for human capital is parallel to the treasury function for the organization. I see them as sort of equivalent or parallel because what the treasury function does for the organization is it manages cash resources, assets, the assets of the organization. And what human capital does is it manages the human capital of the organization. So you need a few essential things for a company to be successful. You need money or cash or an investment, right? You need people because 80% of our GDP comes from services and you can't deliver services without people yet. And you need other things. You need a product, you need marketing, you need sales, right? But the two fundamental resources are money and people. And so if we think about managing people the same way we think about managing capital, right? And that's why we call it human capital. You can draw these parallels between strategic workforce planning and the treasury function when you look at the area of responsibility for these two areas. So for the treasury, there's resource management, which is how do we ensure a supply of cash, right? For human capital is the resource management is talent. How do we ensure the supply of talent for the organization? Structure management. What's the mix of debt and equity to optimize return? From strategic workforce planning, it's the mix of skills and competencies to ensure the appropriate level of talent for the organization to be able to achieve its goals. Risk management. Assessing risks that it could impact a company's financial stability. So the treasury function thinks about how do we manage this risk for the organization. Same thing for people. How do we assess risks that could impact the company's talent stability? How do we make sure that the employees that we want to stay with us, right? How do we ensure that the employees that we have are actually engaged and working and not just spending 80% of their day on the internet, right? We need people to be engaged and productive. Investment management, managing the company's investment portfolio, balancing liquidity needs and risk tolerance, right? That's on the treasury side. On the employee side, on the human capital side, managing the company's talent portfolio, balancing future workforce needs and accessibility to talent pools. So we talked about the shrinking workforce. How do I have a pipeline of talent? How do I fill those jobs quickly? Because nothing is more draining to an organization's resources than having open jobs for 90, 100, 180 days. That's a loss of productivity. You don't have a person in that job working. You've got this open job that's producing zero. Planning and forecasting, collaborating with other departments to develop plans, forecast budgets for operating and financial investments against the company's strategic goals. That's on the treasury side. How about for people? Collaborating with other departments to develop plans, forecast budgets for talent needs and talent deployment against company strategic goals. We've got talent. Are they in the right chairs at the right time in the right departments? Systems and technology. For Treasury, it's overseeing the implementation and maintenance of Treasury management systems and technologies to streamline processes, enhance controls, and improve efficiencies. For talent, overseeing the implementation and maintenance of human capital systems and technologies to streamline processes, enhance controls, and improve efficiencies of human capital. So what is your HCROI? Are you getting a return on that investment? And then the last is compliance and reporting. We talked a little bit about reporting at the beginning of this. For Treasury, it's ensuring compliance with relevant financial regulations and reporting requirements. for human capital. It's ensuring compliance and relevant human capital regulations and reporting requirements that we're going to see more and more in the US.
Yeah.
We're going to see the SEC come out with it. In Europe, they've already passed ESRS. The first reporting deadline is January 2026 for all companies that trade on European exchanges, including American companies that trade their shares on the European exchanges by January of 2026, and that's not that far away. There are rigorous reporting requirements that these companies are going to have to respond to if they expect to continue to trade their shares on those European exchanges.
We mentioned your book several times and that you published it 2 years ago. It seems like it's time for a new one. Anything in the works?
Yes. In fact, I have 2 book projects in the works now. One is with one co-author, and I'm not going to say his name because I haven't gotten his permission yet to say, but it's really timely. I think it's really timely. As I said before, 80% of our U.S. GDP is driven by service, and there hasn't been a really good book around managing human capital in a professional services firm since 1997. And so we are writing, hopefully, the reference, the resource that...
The definitive.
The definitive.
The Bible.
Thank you.
The touchstone.
The definitive book on how to manage human capital in a professional services firm, given all the things that have happened in our economy and our technology conditions.
So, and that's with an author or co-author to be named later.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's about managing human capital and professional services organization. And the second book is with about 5 co-authors. And so I'm not, my co-author and I for the PSO book, we're writing it soup to nuts. For the other book, I'm actually only contributing 3 chapters. And I may be co-authoring a couple of chapters with the other authors. There are 5 or 6 named authors on that book, and it's really about human capital, the advancements in human capital analytics and applications.
Which book comes out first and when?
Both books are sort of in the same state, which is we're in the process of writing right now. I'd say if we're lucky, 2 years from now.
Okay.
So,
all right. Gives us all something to look forward to, Solange.
That's true. So.
Now, any closing thoughts? We ranged pretty far and wide.
I know. It's always like that, right?
Yes.
I think that this is a really exciting time for human capital professionals. And my word of advice to anybody that's in the field or wants to get into the field is get some financial literacy, learn how to read income statements and balance sheets and speak the language of business, and get some proficiency in data analytics, because those are going to be the 2 foundational skills for human capital going forward. We still need the human part of it, but the human part of it cannot only be qualitative or subjective. It's got to be quantitative and objective moving forward.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to speak with you, Solange, I mean, yes, we've had previous conversations, other podcasts I've done, always had great conversations. You just bring so much to the table. The other thing is that some of the things you're talking about are very much aligned with the AIX mission, which is to say, elucidating some of these ideas. AI to a lot of people is just, this big black box. You talk about getting more conversant or literate as far as data analytics. Same, of course, applies. We refer to AIX as a learning platform. We want people in open exchange to be more conversant and also to understand some practical applications of AI. And again, I wanted to have you on because in addition to everything you bring, all the things you talk about with HC Moneyball and that whole human capital financial approach to human capital management, you obviously bring that whole other perspective. So I really do appreciate that. Again, as you said at the outset, you do so much. So to be able to carve out some time and to spend that with us, with me today, I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Today, I spoke with Dr. Solange Charas, CEO and founder of HC Moneyball, a platform that optimizes the impact of human capital from a brand and financial perspective. She is also a full professor of practice at Columbia University in the Human Capital Management Master's Program. She joined us today from her office in New York City. This is Charles Epstein for the X Factor podcast. Thanks for listening.